There is a Kodak film I have been using a lot at the moment, and it's quickly become my favorite 35mm film. It's one for some reason I never thought about trying until a few months ago, and it's Kodak Ektar 100. Kodak Ektar 100 is a color negative film which, as the name suggests, has an ISO of 100. It's a mid-price film, a bit more expensive than Kodak Gold or Color Plus say, but the results are definitely worth the price. Up to recently, I had been using films like Kodak Gold, Kodak Ultramax, Lomography Color Negative 400, films that I still really love and use quite a lot. But about 5 months ago, I picked up some Kodak Ektar 100. It was on sale, so I decided to pick up a couple of rolls, and I put one of the rolls inside my Konica point and shoot and took it out with me and took some pretty basic pictures. And I was really surprised when I got my negatives back. I was blown away by the colors, the contrast, and the really fine grain. I just was expecting to get sort of mediocre results, I think because the photos themselves weren't extraordinary as well. When I got these scans back from the lab, I was truly blown away. Kodak Ektar is known for its very punchy, saturated colors as well as high contrast, and it's these little things that made me fall in love with this film. I actually believe in today's market is one of the closest films you can get that matches Kodachrome and other vintage Kodak films that you just can't get anymore. Like many other Kodak films, you can actually overexpose Kodak Ektar 100, similar to Portra. I wouldn't go overboard, it's a bit more sensitive than, let's say, Portra 160 or Portra 400, but you can definitely expose it at ISO 80, and I think it actually does help get a better final result. As well as having these amazing colors that I've mentioned a few times and having a really deep contrast, I was also actually quite blown away by its use in low light. Obviously, it being a 100 ISO film, you wouldn't necessarily think it would perform very well in a dimly lit situation, but when I was in France a few weeks ago, and I made a whole video on that, I took this film to take some long exposures, and I was actually really blown away by some of these photos, and I want to break a few down. This one right here, which is one of my all-time favorite photos, was taken in a small village in the south of France, and they had this big fair going on, and at the end of the evening they had a fireworks show. I quickly grabbed my Kodak Ektar 100 loaded camera and my tripod with my shutter release cable and hastily tried to compose an image with the fireworks going off. I must have been holding the shutter down for, I'd say, 30 to 40 seconds probably to get this image, or at least as long as the fireworks are going on for. And just look how good the results are. Bear in mind it was pitch black by now. Obviously there's a lot of ambient lighting, and obviously the fireworks produced a lot of light on their own. But still, this is 100 ISO color film, and I think it just did so well. And if you look at this next picture that I took just about half an hour after this, once again it did really well, keeping in mind it was actually very dark. This picture looks very well lit because, as I mentioned, ambient lighting, but also you can see some cars that went through. But still, when you actually look at the footage of me trying to take this photo, you can see how bad the lighting was and how dark it actually was. So I actually think this camera performed really well. So yeah, in low light situations, it handles very well. I do find, however, that in harsh lighting conditions or in strong lighting conditions, it slightly underperforms, which is kind of a bit paradoxical. You would think this film would be better suited for stronger lighting and would perform badly in low lighting. Personally, with my experience, I find that it's the opposite. That is just my opinion, obviously. I do find it renders the lighting and the colors maybe sometimes a bit flat. Bear in mind, I was shooting sometimes in some terrible conditions, either really harsh midday lighting or some very flat lighting due to an overcast day. So yeah, definitely go out and try this film. Don't let my few rolls completely dictate how you should think about this film, obviously. I just, from my personal experience, have preferred it in golden hour, even blue hour. I think that's when this film really performs very well. I think this film is best for cinematic shots, obviously due to the nature of the contrast and the very punchy, almost Technicolor-like colors. I could definitely see this film being used in a commercial shoot. I think with a flash, it would perform extremely well. I can definitely see with the contrast, the colors, and the such fine grain that it has, it's just such a good film. As I mentioned, here in the UK, it's priced at around £18. It goes from sort of between 15 and £20. I've seen some in the US for as cheap as like $11. If you do see this film at a relatively low price and you want to try it out, as I mentioned, I would definitely go for it. So the pros and cons of this film. I would say one of the cons is that it's slightly expensive. However, this is a Kodak professional film and that is a professional grade film. So I don't think you're wasting your money as such. It is a premium quality film. One of my favorite parts is the really saturated colors, very punchy colors, which for me is a pro, but they're not always the most accurate, especially with skin tones. I find that it sometimes handles skin tones quite badly. It's a low ISO film, so obviously if you haven't got a tripod or a shutter release cable, you will need a substantial amount of light to get a decent image out of it. However, low ISO obviously gives you a rich tonality, which I think is really nice. As I've mentioned, I've found that it actually performs really well in certain low light conditions, but you will obviously need the correct gear like a tripod and a shutter release cable. If I was going handheld, I don't think these images would have turned out that well. It's got a very high sharpness and a very fine grain, as I mentioned. In fact, the finest grain in the world, according to the box, which makes it brilliant for scanning, especially home scanning. All the images you've seen in this video were home scanned, other than a few, but most of these are completely scanned at home, and I think the quality is still very good. So overall, this is a film I've just really enjoyed using. It can be slightly unpredictable. You have to learn to expose it properly. This is something I've learned. Just because it's low ISO doesn't mean that it's always going to perform really well when there's a lot of light. Sometimes I feel you almost have to overexpose it to get some nice colors. Obviously, it's better to overexpose film than to underexpose it. Basic rule of thumb, situations will differ, of course, but I tend to, with Kodak film, slightly overexpose them when I can. I would definitely experiment with this film. I think using different lenses, trying with a flash, taking long exposures, astrophotography, anything. I definitely think with this film, it's worth pushing the boundaries, trying to make cinematic shots. That's definitely something I will be trying to achieve with this film. I will now leave you with a little gallery of my favorite pictures that I've taken on Kodak Ektar 100. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you as usual next Saturday for a new video.